Hey guys, Matthew, and welcome to the first episode of Crafting Optimized, a series where I teach you guys how to craft items in the post-harvest nerf era, if you will. So there's two things that you need to know about the series. First off, every single craft which I'll be bringing to you guys are going to have two different versions. There's going to be the budget option at the start of the video, and then a more endgame, mirror tier version, if possible, at the end of the video, and then a hypothetical actual mirror tier item at the very end, where I'll basically talk about the differences between the high budget and the actual mirror tier version, if there is any. And then another thing you need to note is that this is going to be in consideration of the tools that we have available right now. So this is post-harvest nerf, which means no reforge keeping prefixes or suffixes. This means that we are also not getting access to more likelies. We're, using essences, fossils, stuff like that, right? So essentially the tools available right now and what's probably going to be available in the foreseeable future, as I'm basically just going to assume that what's available now in the current stage is what is not going to be changing for the most part. Okay, so the first episode is going to be Chaos Damage Over Time Amulets. Now, Chaos Damage Over Time Amulets are actually a little bit different than any other amulets. They're different than physical, and they're different than even elemental, because of a very simple fact. If we look at chaos modifiers on an amulet, you can see that there's essentially +1 chaos on a prefix, and then there's chaos resistance suffix. There are no other chaos modifiers whatsoever, and this is super important because it means that we do not need to craft on cannot roll attack mods, unlike all of the other +2 amulet crafts. This saves us a lot of currency and also basically makes it much easier to make. The other thing is that there is, however, a suffix, unlike, say, physical, which doesn't have any suffixes whatsoever. And this is also important because it means that we're going to have full suffixes whenever we are working with an item like this. All right, let's start with the actual budget option. So the budget option is going to start off with a fractured amulet. Now, the cool thing is that because of Arch Nemesis adding the modifiers, which drops a bunch of fractured items, you can get fractured items for really, really cheap this league, which is a good thing for crafting. So as you can see here, you can get a +1 fractured amulet for chaos for literally like 30C if you don't care about the base. If you do care about the base and you want something absolutely GG, it'll cost you around like 1 divine for some of the best bases in the game, such as Onyx or Agate and stuff like that. So pretty affordable even for the good bases, but if you want super, super cheap, then you could totally go with like the 30, 40C very, very cheapo bases. Okay, next we're going to want a bunch of Screaming Essences of Envy. Now, why Envy and why Screaming? So if you look at essences here, you can see that Essences of Envy scaled from 26 to 34 on the perfect rolls, so it's only 8% increased damage difference, and that's totally not worth it to go for Deafening unless you wanted to go for something perfect, but if you were going for something perfect, you wouldn't be going for chaos damage, you'd be going for Multiplier. So that's why we are going to be using Screaming, as it's going to get that one extra little bit of damage, maybe 3-4% damage extra on your build, and very, very low cost. All right, so now that we have these Screaming Essences of Envy, which are 1 point per click, we can actually begin our crafting on the Fractured Amulet. Now, one thing that I'll mention before anything else is the Damage Over Time Multiplier, which is by far the best suffix that we can get on a Fractured item, is very rare. It's, so if we look at essences here, you can see that the odds, if you're using an Envy essence and the item is fractured with +1 chaos, the odds of getting like T1 or T2 is literally hundreds of essences. Now, if you wanted like T3, which I think is pretty okay, it's 159 at 1C per click. It's actually pretty affordable. It means that you need to invest 1 extra divine to get an actual multiplier extra on your build on top of the chaos damage and the +1. I'd say it's worth it, but that's completely up to you and your budget and how good you want your amulet to be. All right, so what we're going to do here is we are going to regal this in order to make it rare, and then we are going to start essence spamming with Essences of Envy. And what we're looking for is 1 good suffix. That's all we care about. So if you wanted to go for your actual like Envy, your damage over time multiplier, you could, but all that's important is that we have 1 suffix that we care about. So let's see. Okay, so in this case, we got T1 Intelligence. Now this is perfectly fine. And we also have a random prefix. Now the random prefix is not a problem as long as there's not 2 of them. 1 is okay. All right, so now that we have our chaos damage and 1 decent suffix, let's just say intelligence, there's 2 things that you can do. And it's going to depend on whether you want Aspect of the Spider or not. because it's a very popular thing on damage over time amulets. So if you do want Aspect of the Spider, we are simply going to craft it right away, right? And which is going to fill up our suffixes, which is good for what's going to be coming forward. However, if we don't want Aspect of the Spider, what we're actually going to need to do here is we are going to beastcraft a Ferric Lynx Alpha. Now, Ferric Lynx Alpha is going to remove a random prefix and add a suffix, and because we only have this prefix here, it's basically going to give us a random suffix. Now, we have no control over what the suffix is going to be. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be trash? We have no control over it whatsoever, but all we do know is that we get a suffix for free, and it's also going to open up a prefix slot, which is important because of what's going to be happening right now. Now, once we have the chaos damage and the random, the half-decent suffix alongside our random suffix or aspect of the spider, we are going to need to do the most expensive thing in the entire craft, which is going to be our prefix, which is crafting. Suffixes cannot be changed. So that is going to be a crafting modifier for 2 divines. Now, suffixes cannot be changed is going to make it so that our chaos damage, our good suffix, and our random suffix or our aspect are basically safe. Now, once you get to the point where you have suffixes cannot be changed on the prefix, there's 2 things that you need to look at. First, if you don't have any other prefix whatsoever, I would recommend going for Exiling because it's safer, right? Because your suffixes are locked and this is fractured, whenever you actually use Exiling on suffixes cannot be changed with no other prefixes, it is guaranteed to hit suffixes cannot be changed and guaranteed to give you a single veiled prefix and nothing else, right? Nothing else. However, hypothetically speaking, let's just say that you essence spam into 2 good suffixes or 1 good suffix and your aspect of the spider, and you actually have a random prefix as well, right? So let's just say that you also had armor or something like that. Once you get to the point where your suffixes cannot be changed with all your suffixes that are good, if you were to Ashling, there's a chance that it hits this and then you're stuck with this bad prefix. So you actually need to use a Veiled Chaos. Now, the downside of using a Veiled Chaos is the equivalent of using a Chaos or a Reforge. There's a 10% chance that it gives you 6 modifiers. If it gives you 6 modifiers, right, so it gives you the Veil modifier and another random prefix, which is, again, a 10% occurrence, like here, then your craft is done for. There's nothing else you can do. We lost the ability of Reforge keeping prefixes or Reforge keeping suffixes, so that's the end of the craft. We would unveil, and whatever we get is whatever we get. So in this case, we got mana and spell damage. That's pretty awful, right? Remember, though, there's only a 10% chance of that actually happening, and because your suffixes are relatively cheap, it's just spamming a few essences, 20, 30 essence to get something decent, and then your aspect or whatever else. I would say it's not the end of the world on a craft like this to use a veiled chaos and take that 10% chance. It's much cheaper to do that, in my opinion, than say, for example, to actually wipe it and then to craft back on the actual suffixes cannot be changed and then to go for an Exiling, because that's going to add another 2 divine to your cost, which is just absolutely not worth it. So if you have another prefix, once your suffixes are done, just remember that you can use a Veiled Chaos. If, however, you have no other prefixes, definitely go for Ashling, as there is no risk there. You're removing that 10% chance. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Now what we're going to do is look for the actual block that we care about. So we're going to head over to Veil modifiers and look at the actual weighting of the different modifiers. And you can see that mana has 3 different modifiers at 600 weighting for a total of 1,800. And if you craft one of them, you block all of them. Unlike, say, for example, the Area of Effect, Melee, and Proj, these are each their own individual mod pools. So what we're going to do is we are going to benchcraft mana, which is right here. And then we're going to unveil, and it's pretty likely going to give us life. Now, we got pretty unlucky in this case, so let's go ahead and just take like prod speed, and then we would craft life and be done with it. However, most of the time, it'll give you life. Like, I'm not sure the exact amount, but it's probably somewhere around 70, 80% or something. It'll give us some life that we can pick. And then once we get life, our last prefix is going to be up to us. For the most part, on builds like these, you're going to be looking for non-channeling skills, but you could also go for really whatever you want. You could go for some damage while leeching, for example. If your build is leeching, you could go for ES if you're playing a hybrid build. You can really kind of do whatever you want, but for the most part, I think that non-channeling is the way to go. And this would give you essentially +1 life, chaos damage, a good suffix, and then either a random suffix or aspect of the spider, which is arguably a good suffix, and then non-channeling, which is like a 4 to 5 mod item if you care for Aspect of the Spider, for really, really cheap. That's essentially our budget option. Now let's have a look at our less budget option, which is going to look something like this, which is going to be +2 alongside life, .multi, an unveil, and then a crafted mod for, again, arguably like a 4 to, or like a 5 stat item, where 1 stat is like a little bit questionable, which is the unveil modifier. It's not as good as what we used to be able to get in the past, but it's still not bad. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and see exactly how to do that. So we're going to create a new item. It's going to be a jewelry. It's going to be an amulet. So let's go with an onyx, no influences. And then the first thing we're going to do is we are going to alteration spam the prefix +1 all. Now the downside of this modifier is that it's super rare. So if you actually go to alterations here, and you look at non-fractured, you can see that +1 all has a 1,850 alterations required, and if you're not going to use augment, it's 2,600 alterations required. So it's a very, very rare modifier. This portion of the craft alone is probably 2 times more expensive than the entirety of the last craft that I actually talked about. So we're obviously in a whole different league here. Okay, so once we have our +1, what we're going to do is we are going to craft the suffix prefixes cannot be changed. Now this is also 2 divines. So let's go and craft prefixes cannot be changed. Now, we used to be able to reforge from this point on. However, GGG made it so you can only reforge rare items now. You can no longer reforge magics, which is kind of annoying because it's going to add a lot of cost in imprints. So what we would do once we get to this point is we would beastcraft a Caustic Kimmeral. This is going to give us an imprint, which is a save state of our item so that we can come back to that specific state at any point in time if something goes wrong. Now, normally, we would just be able to reforge life and get until we essentially imprint, reforge life, imprint, reforge life until we get a decent amount of life. The downside is that now we can only reforge rare items. What that means is that we need to regal before. If we regal a prefix, because we have prefixes cannot be changed, we're doomed. So we need to regal a suffix. Every single time we reforge we regal a prefix, we need to imprint it back, which is super annoying. But imprints are way cheaper than, say, crafting on prefixes cannot be changed, so that's what we got to do. Now, once we reforge a suffix, we can actually go ahead and do our reforge life, and hopefully we get a good life mod, or a good life tier. So we're just going to go ahead and do this. Now, again, this is a super expensive craft, so this could take a while, but eventually we would get a decent amount of life. So let's say T3, maybe we don't want T3. All right, there we go, T1. Now, once you have your +1 and your T1, the other important thing is that we need to make sure that there are no other prefixes on our item. If there's another prefix, we are going to need to beastcraft it using the Ferric Lynx Alpha. Now, why do we use a Ferric Lynx Alpha and not an annul? Essentially comes down to how many modifiers we have. If we have 3 suffixes, we are not going to be able to use a Ferric Lynx Alpha. We'll just have to annul. If we have 2 suffixes, we are going to also want to annul. However, if there's only a single suffix, like this for example, we are going to want to use a Ferric Lynx Alpha because we always want to have at least 1 suffix to save us a little bit of currency later on. Alright, so once we have our 1 suffix and then our 3 prefixes, we gotta get rid of this. So we would go for an annul, we would go for a beastcraft because we have only 1 suffix. If we have 2 suffixes, we'd go for an annul, so on. So hopefully here what happens is we keep the +1, we keep the life, and then we get rid of the ES, which is exactly what happened after a few tries. So you can see this gets really expensive. Now we have +1, we have life, and we have 2 suffixes, which is absolutely perfect. What we would do here is we would craft on prefixes cannot be changed, which is also a suffix. However, hypothetically speaking, let's just say that you needed to do some annulling, and you get to the point where your item looks like this. So you have only life and +1, and then 1 random suffix. What you're going to need to do is craft on an aspect. Now, aspect is essentially just going to act as a block, as a fodder modifier, which is going to block a suffix. Then we can go back to crafting our prefixes cannot be changed. Now, once we have our +1 in our life with our 3 suffixes and making sure that we have prefixes cannot be changed, the cool thing about Chaos is that it doesn't have any actual attack-based prefixes. There's only +1 Chaos, and then the only suffix is Chaos Res. So if our Chaos Res, if our suffixes are full, because the new harvest augments before it removes, which is different than what it used to do. It used to remove everything that it could remove, and then it would add. Now it's the opposite. So it's going to add before it removes. And because of this, it's going to guarantee that we get +1 skills, and then what it removes is going to be random. So looking at our craft at this point, we have our 3 suffixes and our +1. We could just simply augment chaos, and there is a 100% chance that we get +1 chaos. Now, what it's going to remove is random, and it does matter a little bit because it's going to change the cost of what's going to be happening right now. So let's just say that we got to this point and we got our +2, and then we got, our random aspect, and our prefixes cannot be changed. So essentially it removed a random suffix, which is not prefixes cannot be changed. What I would recommend doing at this point, because we already have the block, is actually to use a Hunter Exalted Orb. Now, the thing about using the Hunter Exalted Orb is that there's a 1,500 weighting out of 6,500. So there's 6,500 total and 1,500 of things that we care for, which is Malevolence and then the dot multi, right? Because the weighting is pretty much heavily against us, the odds that we actually slam something good on the Hunter Orb is pretty low. The odds that we slam something bad is pretty high. So since our prefixes cannot be changed is already there, when we slam this orb here, we can straight up go directly into a reforge instead of needing to wipe our suffixes before. Now, let's just say that we actually slammed something good, like Malevolence. Now we have Malevolence and we have our aspect, which we don't want, and we have our prefixes cannot be changed. Because prefixes cannot be changed, and this is good, like say it was Malevolence or Chaos.multi, what we can do is try to save it, and because prefixes cannot be changed, we can simply go for an annul. If we hit the mod that we don't want, it's going to save us a lot of currency, like this, for example, right? Because now we have a Malevolence, and we also have prefixes cannot be changed, and we got rid of the modifier that we didn't want. Now, let's just say that we got rid of the modifier that we liked, so be it Malevolence or Chaos.multi, it's going to be a different story. Or let's just say that we actually remove the prefixes cannot be changed, then we'd have to craft on prefixes cannot be changed again. But let's just say that we actually have the one that we want. What we could do is go straight up into the Iceling because prefixes cannot be changed is already there. All right, so we could go do that. But the best case scenario is actually that, let's just say let's say we get to this point where we have the mod that we want, the mod that we don't want, and the prefixes cannot be changed. If we know the mod that we don't want, what I would recommend doing is removing this prefixes cannot be changed. And because of the cost of getting the modifier that you want back, which we can only get Malevolence if we slam it from the Hunter Exalted Orb. We cannot get it after the fact, unless we get super lucky on a Reforged Chaos. What we would get normally is a Chaos Reforged for Chaos Damage over Time multiplier, which has a weighting of 1,000 versus 1,500 on the Chaos Resistance, which means essentially 2 out of 5 times when we reforge, we're going to get Chaos.multi, and 1 out of 5 times you're going to get T1. You also need to remember that every single time you reforge, there's a 10% chance that you end up with 6 modifiers, which means your craft is done unless you want to go for a yellow annul, in which case you would be putting all of your prefixes in danger. So what I would recommend doing is multi-modding. Now, if you multi-mod and then you craft on prefixes cannot be changed because you have the modifier that you care for, be it Malevolence or dot multi, instead of being a 50-50 when you ashling, it's a 66% chance to succeed. It does add 2 extra divines, but the cost of getting the modifier that you want back, in my opinion, is way more expensive than that. So that's what I would do. I would craft multi-mod, prefixes cannot be changed, and then go for an ashling. Then, of course, we would get to the point where we have prefixes cannot be changed or the other suffix. If we keep the mod that we actually want, we can basically just remove the craft, go for a block of any type. Now, the best block on amulets is by far the Valpact. It has a weighting of 3,000 versus anything else, and it's probably the absolute worst. So we can go ahead and go to our suffixes, craft on the Valpact mod. Wrong amulet. Go on to our suffixes, craft on Valpact, and then when we unveil, it's pretty guaranteed to give us something half decent. Now, we got pretty unlucky here. This is probably one of the worst case scenarios for this specific build. But yeah, it's pretty likely it'll give us either attributes, resistances, minimum charges. There's quite a few things. Attacking cast speed could be good for like Toxic Rain or even like Forbidden Right because cast speed, right? There's a lot of pretty good things that it can give us. And then, of course, the last modifier would be whatever we want that we could craft on the bench. Additional additional resistances, attributes, or even, minimum charges could be quite good for a build like this. Like minimum frenzy charges could be quite good. And that essentially would be the end result of her item. So I'm going to go ahead and do it essentially if, I had done it the regular way. So I slammed my Hunter Orb, I got nothing good. So I would have my prefixes cannot be changed already there, and then I would hit it with a Reforged Chaos, right? 2 out of 5 times, we are going to basically get Chaos Damage over Time Multiplier. When we get the Chaos Damage over Time Multiplier, multi-mod, prefixes cannot be changed, Ashling, 66% success rate, remove this, go ahead and craft our suffix Valpact, go ahead and unveil for something, attack and cast speed would be amazing for, say, Toxic Rain, and then we can finish off the craft with something else which would be quite good for, say, Toxic Rain, which would be minimum frenzy charges. And this would essentially be about as close to mirror tier as it really gets. What is this missing to actually be mirror tier? Well, the only thing it's missing is the Malevolence modifier. Now, the downside is that the Malevolence modifier is not targetable. There's nothing you can do about it, right? So the only thing that you can do is target the Chaos Damage multiplier, and then if you reforge Chaos and you also somehow got the Malevolence modifier, then you essentially have a mirror tier amulet if you have like everything else T1, right? Like, so you have the T1, the +2, the T1 dot multi, the Malevolence, and then you could craft on whatever you want as your final modifier, and that would be an actual mirror tier amulet. But that is completely RNG. There's nothing we can really do deterministically speaking, so we're not really going to go there. We're just going to go for the Ashling instead, which is, better than the vast majority of other modifiers that we get if we were to, say, for example, slam an Exalt or something like that. And that is our amulet of choice. All right, that's pretty much all I have for today's video in terms of the budget option for Chaos Amulet, as well as the super endgame option. If you have any specific craft that you'd like me to explain step by step, feel free to let me know in the description of the video. And before I go, as always, I do want to say a huge thank you to my supporters. So 3 Alexes, Skady, Bearded Ape, Bert, Brandon, Gustavo, Tim, Domosame Desu, Miss Jar, Loopold, Mercury, Nate, Patrick, Riskgirl, as well as Rocky, Soulmonk, The Great Master, Thomas Mass, as well as Maestro, Nailed, Ven, Bitizen, Nictarion, Noix, Athion, Larsis. Anyone else who has supported me in the past, and anyone else who wishes to remain anonymous. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace.